How long do you plan to stay in bed? Don't slack off on the housework just because you have a little cold. I was startled by my husband Lien's angry voice, which was so close that it felt like it was right in my ear. I shot up from the couch, feeling disoriented. I had a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit since this morning and had to call in sick to work. Even seeing me in such a bad condition, Lien showed no concern. If you're staying home all day, at least do the housework, he said before leaving for work. If the chores weren't done by the time Lien got home, he would be furious at me harshly. The mere thought of it terrified me. But my body wouldn't cooperate, and I had passed out on the couch. The room was dark when I woke up, and there was him, standing before me with an angry expression. Don't you dare you say you spend the whole day sleeping? As he questioned me, I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to run away, but my body was too heavy and weak to move. He had always demanded that I do all the housework, treating me like a servant every single day. When we were dating, he had been kind, but his attitude drastically changed once we got married. Despite everything, a part of me still wanted to believe in him, but the constant verbal abuse had worn me down. I'm sorry. I'll start dinner right away. Holding back tears, I struggled to stand up from the couch. Lien didn't offer to help me. Instead, he yelled at me from behind as I made my way to the kitchen. You're completely useless. Immediately after, I felt a sharp pain in my back, and my body lurched forward. Lien had kicked me from behind. Hurry up and make dinner. And get the shower ready. Oh, and the fridge is out of beer. Go buy some now. Looking down at me with a cold voice, he ordered me around. I couldn't take it anymore. It felt as if he was telling me I was worth no more than a slave, and despair washed over me. I didn't understand why I had to endure such treatment, and tears streamed down my face. Please, stop it already. I pleaded, but he only laughed mockingly. As he lifted his foot to kick me again, I heard a familiar voice from the living room entrance. Is there anything else you want to say? My name is Mary. I currently live alone, away from my family, working as a sales clerk at a certain company. I lost my mother early on and lived with my father until I got a job. My father, who is gentle and serious, poured all his love into his only daughter to make up for my mother's absence. He went through a lot for my sake, and I am truly grateful to him for raising me and sending me to college. When I got a job and moved out, parting from my father was unbearably sad. Mary, I'll always be on your side. If you ever need help, you can always count on me. With a gentle smile, my father saw me off. We keep in touch regularly and update each other on our lives. During summer vacations and Christmas, I go back home, and my father always welcomes me warmly, which brings me peace. My father holds a high position at his workplace, and his advice has been very helpful in my early career. I've just entered my second year at my current company. I had finally gotten used to my work life and was starting to feel more fulfilled with the increasing responsibilities I was being given. One day, as I was heading to the break room for lunch, a man approached me and started a conversation. Hey there, Mary. The man who greeted me with a bright smile was none other than Lien, the man who would later become my husband. Lien was 3 years older than me and worked in sales. He was also the son of the company's president, though he never flaunted this fact. Whenever we met in the break room, he was always the first to say hello. Because we weren't that far apart in age, I found him easy to talk to and had always had a positive impression of him. Looks like you've been working hard lately. Our success is thanks to the support from you and the other office staff. We really appreciate it. Hearing this made me smile naturally. Thank you very much. When I responded, I've been wanting to talk to you about things other than work. How about we go out for a meal sometime? He continued. Lien was apparently drawn to my diligent work ethic and wanted to get to know me better. I was taken aback by his proposal since I had never been approached so directly by a man before. Are you sure about me? Of course. How about we exchange numbers? I'll text you tonight. As I hesitated, Lien took out his smartphone and continued the conversation with a smile. At times like this, his slightly pushy nature would come through. Lien had a confident and decisive personality, never hesitating to make decisions. In contrast, I had always been timid and often found myself unable to express my opinions, constantly worrying about others' reactions. That's why I found his assertiveness and decisiveness so attractive. After exchanging contact information, we started communicating privately and went out for meals together several times. As we spent more time together, he eventually confessed his feelings to me. I really like you, Mary. Will you go out with me? Hearing this made me incredibly happy. By then, I had also developed feelings for Lien, so there was no reason for me to refuse. Thus, we started dating and our relationship seemed to be going smoothly. However, as our relationship became known within the company, I began to receive warnings from my colleagues. You might not know this because you haven't been here long, but Lien has some personality issues. There are even people who left the company because of him. A senior colleague who had been kind to me since I joined the company gave me this warning. Another close colleague. I saw him yelling at someone who seemed timid in the break room the other day. He did it in front of everyone. I think it's best if you stop dating him, said. But when I thought back to his behavior, I couldn't imagine him doing something like that. He could be pushy, but I couldn't see him cornering someone or shouting at them. I understood that my colleagues were concerned for my well-being, but it hurt to hear Lien being painted as the bad guy. He had always been sincere with me, leading me with confidence when I struggled with indecision. I loved that about him, so I decided to take the rumors with a grain of salt and not let them affect my feelings. Even after hearing those stories, I continued my relationship with him, and a year into our dating. Mary, don't you think it's time we got married? Lien asked me one day while we were spending a day off together at his place. I was 25 at the time, and Lien was 28. I honestly felt it was still too early for us to get married. However, he had a strong desire to get married and was the type to act immediately once he made up his mind. I really love Mary. That's why I want to get married as soon as possible. Mary, you want to marry me someday too, right? Yes, of course. Then there's no need to wait. We both have good incomes, so our married life should be stable. And if you want to continue working after we get married, I won't oppose it. His serious expression left me at a loss for words. Lien was unlikely to change his mind, and in the end, I nodded, overwhelmed by his determination. Great! Thank you, Mary. I'll cherish you forever. Seeing Lien so happy, I couldn't voice my fears about marriage. But I also wanted to marry Lien eventually and walk through life together, so I decided to think positively about it. The past year of dating Lien had been so much fun, I believed our married life would be just as enjoyable. Shortly after, we went to my father's house to announce our engagement. My father was surprised at first, but soon smiled gently. Mary is no longer a child. I won't oppose what she has decided, he said. Then he looked Lien straight in the eye and said, Please take care of Mary. She lost her mother early and didn't have siblings, so she's been lonely. Please be there for her in my place. My father had always put me first. His words were filled with love for me, and I found myself tearing up, even though we weren't married yet. Lien responded, "Yes, I will," with a proud look. "Mary, I'll always be watching over you from this house. If things get tough, you can always come back." As we were about to leave, my father called out and said these warm words. His kind words brought tears to my eyes again. I was so happy that my beloved father blessed our marriage. A few days later, we went to Lien's family's home for a family meeting. Lien's father, Jim, who was also our company's president, was strict at work but easygoing in private. Lien's mother, Susan, welcomed me warmly and was delighted about our marriage. "Please take care of Lien. If he ever causes you trouble, feel free to rely on us," Jim said politely to me. I was taken aback since I had only seen him in his professional capacity. "You're exaggerating, Dad." Mary is surprised, Lien said, exasperated, but Jim, who was serious about everything, treated me with respect and courtesy. Although Lien had told me his father was strict and intimidating, I found Jim to be very thoughtful and kind. I felt reassured that I could build a good relationship with my in-laws, and soon, Lien and I got married. We moved into a spacious apartment and started our life together. I decided to continue working and try my best to balance my job and household chores. However, looking back, I realized I had underestimated marriage. Until then, we had hardly ever fought, and I believed we would continue to get along well after becoming a married couple. It only took about a week after our wedding for me to realize how wrong I was. As we started getting used to living together, I began to notice Lien's flaws that hadn't bothered me while we were dating. First of all, he doesn't help with any of the housework. I also work full-time, so I suggested we split the chores, but he wouldn't listen. He lived alone before we got married, so he should be able to do all the housework, but as soon as we got married, he stopped doing anything around the house. Housework is a wife's job, isn't it? Unlike you, Mary, I have to go out for work, not just sit in an office all day. I come home exhausted every day, so there's no way I can help with the chores. He uses this excuse to leave everything to me. Sure, Lien is busy visiting clients and negotiating with customers every day. He often has overtime, so I do feel bad asking him to help with the housework. But that's not the only problem. What about dinner? And you haven't even prepared my shower yet. I'm tired, so hurry up. And there was no beer. Go buy some later. When Lien comes home from work, he lounges on the sofa and orders me around like this. The constant demands are making my head spin. Wait a minute. I just got home myself. I'll make dinner right away, but can you get the beer yourself? What? Why should I go out again? Stop complaining and just go get it. When I argue back, he gets angry and yells at me, and I always end up losing the argument to him. Since we got married, Lien's attitude towards me has changed, and he has become more arrogant. And his attitude wasn't just limited to our home. It happened one day at his office during lunch break. How many times do I have to tell you? Why can't you get it right? I heard his irritated voice and looked over to see Lien reprimanding an employee. A colleague sitting with me sighed. He is at it again. In a weary tone. She was the one who had told me before about Lien yelling at coworkers in the break room. I whispered. Has he always been like this? Asked. She nodded. Yeah. You may not have seen it before, Mary, but he does this all the time. And said. I couldn't believe it and looked back at him. He was still yelling angrily, using even harsher words. This company will be mine in the future. When I'm the boss, I'll fire useless people like you right away. The words were unbearable to hear, so I stood up and went over to Lien. As his wife, I couldn't just watch the situation from afar.
What are you doing? Stop it already!
When I spoke up, he glared at me irritably. It seemed he finally realized that everyone in the break room was watching him. He clicked his tongue in annoyance and walked away without saying anything. The next night, when Lien came home, he shouted at me.
Mary, what was that about at lunch? An incompetent employee talking back to the future president.
His words were so harsh that I was stunned into silence.
But, Lien, your behavior was too much.
I mustered the courage to point out his attitude, but it only seemed to provoke him more. I was stunned.
Shut up. Don't you dare tell me what to do, Mary, when you're useless both at work and at home.
When he threw his bag onto the floor and shouted. Being naturally timid, I couldn't muster the courage to argue back, so I just looked down. It was incredibly shocking to be called incompetent both at work and at home. He had once admired my dedication to my job, saying that was what drew him to me. And I genuinely believed I was doing my best at both work and household chores. No matter how tired I was after returning home from work, I made sure to complete all the housework that same day. Yet, Lien seemed completely oblivious to my efforts, which made me incredibly sad. I started noticing Lien's frequent verbal abuse towards colleagues at work. However, he skillfully hid his true nature in front of Jim and our bosses, targeting only those who were timid or held lower positions than him. He arrogantly boasted about taking over the company one day, all the while hurling baseless insults. The bad rumors I had heard about Lien from coworkers turned out to be true. His domineering behavior extended beyond the office and became worse towards me.
Dinner's not ready yet? And the shower isn't prepared either? You know when I get home, right? Normally, a wife would have everything perfectly ready by the time her husband returns.
He would coldly criticize me, saying, even though we both finished work at the same time unless Lien worked late. It was impossible for me to have dinner and the shower ready at exactly the right time. Yet, he would sigh deeply in frustration and say,
what's the point of being married if my wife is this useless?
You're worthless at work too. I would weakly respond, I'm sorry. I'll get it ready right away. His cold stare would pierce through me. The daily grind of being treated like a slave both at home and work was wearing me down. There were moments I thought about reaching out to my father or Jim because living under the same roof as Lien was unbearable. But both of them had been so happy for our marriage, and I didn't want to burden them. Most importantly, I was terrified of what he would do if he found out I confided in them. It was clear that things would get even worse if he knew. One day, something happened that made me wish I had sought help sooner. I woke up feeling incredibly weak and measured my temperature, finding it had reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit. I had pushed myself too hard and fallen ill. Getting out of bed was a struggle, so I decided I had to take a day off work. Just then, I heard Lien shouting from outside the bedroom. I dragged my aching body to the living room to prepare his breakfast. Lien was waiting, visibly irritated, and I explained my condition. My temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, so I've decided to stay home from work today. I'm sorry, but I could only prepare a simple breakfast. Lien glared at me with annoyance.
It's just a cold. Don't complain. You must handle yourself better.
There was no sign of concern from him. After eating the breakfast I had managed to prepare while feeling faint, Lien coldly said,
just because you're staying home from work doesn't mean you get to sleep all day. If you slack off on the housework, you'll regret it.
He then left for work. Before we got married, if I had a cold and was bedridden, Lien would come over and take care of me. I couldn't believe how much he had changed. But since we started living together, Lien's arrogant personality had become apparent. I couldn't understand why I had agreed to marry Lien, and tears started to flow. After having a small breakfast and taking some fever medicine, I thought I should do some chores, but my consciousness was fuzzy and my body wouldn't cooperate. When you're alone and not feeling well, your thoughts tend to spiral negatively. I thought about calling my dad for help, but he was probably just starting work at the office. I didn't want to bother him, so I collapsed onto the couch. I decided to rest a bit before doing any housework and closed my eyes, quickly losing consciousness. It's unclear how much time passed after that.
Mary, how long are you going to sleep? You haven't even started dinner.
Lien's angry voice startled me, and I shot up from the couch.
What? Lien, you're back? What time is it?
The lights were on in the room, and when I glanced at the window, it was already dark outside. I realized I'd been asleep since the afternoon and felt a chill run through me.
What is this mess? You haven't cleaned or done the laundry. Don't tell me you've been slacking off all day. What were you doing?
Being scolded right after waking up gave me a headache. Whether the fever medicine didn't work or had worn off, my body was still hot and I felt dazed. Lien was furious, and all I could do was apologize.
I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well. I'll start making dinner right away.
I answered in a weak voice, struggling to stand up from the couch. Lien didn't offer a hand, and instead glared at me with a harsh expression.
Don't use feeling sick as an excuse to slack off. You even took off work, so the least you could do is have the house chores done by the time I get home. You're completely useless.
His heartless words pushed me to my limit. With tears welling up in my eyes and my voice trembling, I protested.
What did you say? I'm not your housekeeper. Can't I rest when I'm feeling sick? We're supposed to help each other out, especially at times like this. Who do you think you're talking to? Hurry up and get dinner and the shower ready. I'm tired.
He completely ignored my plea and only thought about himself. I was so frustrated, but I felt dizzy and was on the verge of collapsing, so I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. Turning my back to him, I headed to the kitchen to start dinner preparations. Then,
You're using a cold as an excuse to slack off. You useless slave.
He said something terrible. Immediately after, I felt a sharp pain in my back and stumbled forward. To my horror, he had kicked me from behind. Letting out a small scream, I fell and hit my head on the corner of the couch. Holding my aching head, I curled up on the floor, and Lien looked down at me with irritation.
By the way, there's no beer in the fridge. Go buy some now. Get up.
He rushed me with a cold voice, and I finally couldn't take it anymore. With tears streaming down my face, I looked up at Lien. Please, stop. I pleaded. But Lien just sneered.
Do you think crying will solve anything? That pisses me off even more. Why do you think I married you? Even if you're useless, at least be somewhat useful to me.
Hearing Lien's words, I felt darkness creeping in. So he married me just to treat me like a slave? He was telling me I was worth nothing more.
Wasn't he so kind before we got married? Was that all a lie too?
I asked, recalling the gentle Lien from before our marriage. Then Lien sneered at my question, as if mocking me.
Oh, that. It was a hassle, but I tried hard to make a good impression on Mary. I thought I could easily fool her since she's so timid.
Hearing those words shattered the part of me that still wanted to believe in Lien.
How could you do something so terrible?
Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Lien looked at me with disgust.
Get up already,
he demanded, lifting one foot to kick me again. Unable to stand, I covered my head with my hands and closed my eyes. But at that moment, a voice that wasn't Lien's came from the living room entrance.
Have you nothing left to say?
A familiar voice, flat but tinged with anger, directed at Lien. As I raised my head, Lien turned to look as well. There stood my father and Jim, both with angry expressions. The voice was unmistakably Jim's.
What? Dad? And Paul, why are you here?
Ignoring the panicked Lien, my father rushed to me and helped me up. Mary, are you okay? Jim told me you had a fever and took the day off work. Jim is my father-in-law's name. Dad. Hearing my father speak so gently released the tension in me, and I couldn't help but cry out loud. As he rubbed my back, my father glared at Lien with a furious expression.
We came to check on you because Jim was worried, and look what we find. What have you done to her?
Lien, overwhelmed by my father's intensity, stepped back, only to find Jim standing behind him.
It was clear from Lien's behavior at work that he didn't care about Mary. Has he always been so cruel to her? Shame on you!
Jim, who had harshly scolded Lien, had found out that I hadn't gone to work due to illness and asked Lien about my condition. When Lien's response was indifferent, Jim grew suspicious and contacted my father to come check on me. Jim's concern touched my heart, and I wept even more.
Wait, Dad. It's a misunderstanding. I was just scolding Mary because she slept all day and didn't do any housework after taking the day off.
Still trying to make excuses, Lien faced Jim's cold stare.
Why would Lien expect his sick wife to do all the housework? Can't he do some of it himself? Well, because she has always done everything, and in our relationship, housework is her job.
Hearing Lien's selfish words, my father spoke up next.
Don't be ridiculous. I saw you yelling at Mary and kicking her over. Instead of caring for your sick wife, you called her a slave and treat her so horribly. Don't you feel any shame?
Lien, pale and desperate, looked to Jim for help. But Jim wouldn't let him off.
We'll finish this talk at home. Today, you're going back to your parents' place.
Saying. Lien, with no way to argue against Jim, started trembling.
No way!
And then he collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Afterward, Jim apologized deeply, and my father took me to the hospital. The doctor explained that the sudden fever was likely due to overwork and stress. With this diagnosis, I was given a medical certificate and decided to take some time off work to recover. My father insisted that I couldn't return home and had me stay at his house to rest. However, the next day, he started contacting me frequently. He had been scolded thoroughly by Jim yesterday and seemed subdued, but it appears Lien hadn't learned his lesson at all. I received dozens of messages from Lien, all of which were insults directed at me, filled with crude and childish language.
It's all your fault that my dad yelled at me all night. You humiliated me. It's all your fault.
Messages like this kept coming, and my anger gradually turned into exasperation. I started to feel disgusted with myself for getting involved with such an irredeemable person. I felt it was foolish to have listened to Lien all this time, and at that moment, I decided to divorce him clearly. I communicated my intent to divorce via message and planned to discuss it once I recovered my health. I was scared to return to the house where Lien was, but my father and Jim agreed to accompany me, which lightened my heart a little. As soon as the discussion began, I handed Lien the divorce papers. However, Lien, sitting across the table from me,
I will never agree to a divorce,
said sulkily. Jim then,
stop being so childish,
scolded Lien. Next, my father, sitting next to me, slammed the table and glared at Lien with a stern expression.
Think about how you treated Mary. How could you not have apologized even once up until now? Shouldn't you apologize to her before complaining?
Both Jim and my father, their faces red with anger, started blaming Lien. Unable to counter their intensity, Lien turned pale. After hesitating for a while, he finally apologized to me begrudgingly.
I'm sorry, but I absolutely don't want a divorce. Well, then look at this.
Fed up with Lien's refusal to divorce, I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag. When I placed it next to the divorce papers on the table, Lien's eyes widened in surprise. It was a medical certificate from the hospital.
Read what it says here. My high fever was due to the mental stress and overwork caused by you, Lien. If you don't agree to the divorce, I will take this to court. Court? Wait a minute. Please don't do that.
Lien began to panic, but I was prepared to go to court if he didn't agree to the divorce. Besides the medical certificate, Jim had cleverly recorded a video when Lien kicked me, providing evidence that would be overwhelmingly against Lien in court. Lien looked to Jim for help. Of course, Jim was not going to side with him. With a stern expression, he silently urged Lien to sign.
All right.
Finally giving up, Lien reluctantly signed the divorce papers. Thus, the divorce was finalized, and I was awarded compensation greater than the usual amount. I returned to my father's house and began living with him again. After our divorce became known at the company, Lien, who had been behaving arrogantly, started being looked down upon by the employees. His pride wouldn't allow him to quit, so he continued going to work despite the cold treatment he received. Despite causing such a commotion, he still believed he would eventually take over the company. However, Jim, furious over the incident, decided to appoint a competent employee within the company as his successor instead of a family member. When he announced this, the employees' attitudes toward Lien changed drastically. Finding himself completely ostracized, Lien could no longer bear the situation and unbelievably came to my father's house. It was an event that happened just when my symptoms had finally subsided and I had regained a peaceful life.
It's all your fault. My parents have abandoned me too. What are you going to do about it? You've ruined my life.
He shouted at the entrance, glaring at me with resentful eyes. I realized he had no remorse for his past actions, and I was really angry.
Don't be ridiculous. I'm the one whose life has been ruined. If you keep causing trouble, I'll call the police. What?
Lien seemed taken aback that I would talk back, but quickly turned red and started yelling again.
Don't mess with me. Don't you dare treat me like a fool.
Then he grabbed me and yanked my hair violently. The memory of being kicked before flashed back, and I let out a small scream, unable to move.
Stop it! Let go of Mary!
My father immediately stepped in and pulled Lien away from me.
You haven't learned anything. From now on, stay away from her.
While my father was scolding Lien, I managed to call the police, my hands trembling. The police arrived quickly and restrained him.
Damn it!
He shouted, glaring at my father and me angrily until the very end. That was the last time I saw Lien. After that, Lien was fired from his company. When Jim found out that Lien had come to my house, he came to apologize in person.
I'm really sorry.
Jim apologized deeply, and my father and I tried to soothe him.
It's not your fault. It's okay now. No, I'm Lien's father. It was my fault for how I raised him.
It was so painful to see him genuinely ashamed. I would never forgive Lien for causing so much trouble for his parents. Lien was issued a restraining order to stay away from me. After my leave of absence, I decided to resign from my company for good.
Mary, it's not your fault. I know how much you've done for the company. Can't you stay?
Jim tried to persuade me, but my decision was firm. Thank you, but staying would just make things awkward with you. I'm sorry for causing trouble. I'm really grateful for everything you've done for me. I expressed my gratitude to Jim and declined his offer, leaving the company. After that, my father suggested I come work for his company, but I refused. It would have been easy to say yes, but I didn't want to rely on my father too much. I shook my head because I didn't want to develop a sense of dependence.
I want to reassess my weak personality. From now on, I'll try to stand on my own.
When I declared that, my father looked a bit sad but nodded in agreement.
All right. If that's what you've decided, I'll support you. It's your life, so live it as you like.
My father's eyes welled up with tears as he gave his consent, his emotions barely held in check. After that, I discussed our future plans with my father, and we decided to sell our family home and move away to prevent Lien from coming back. Taking this opportunity, my father entrusted his company to someone he trusted and moved overseas. It seems he had always been interested in living abroad. Later, I had the chance to hear from Jim about what happened to Lien after that. Apparently, after being released by the police, Lien returned home once, but his in-laws sent him to a distant relative's farm to keep an eye on him.
They sent him to the farm because he kept complaining when he came home. They wanted to straighten out his rotten attitude.
He told me, sounding quite enthusiastic about it. As for me, I managed to find a new job and moved to a new town. It will take some time to get used to my new life and sort out my feelings, so for now, I'm focusing solely on my work. I'm not thinking about finding a new boyfriend or getting remarried at the moment. However, I do hope to meet someone wonderful someday, but I'm planning to take things at my own pace. My father and I keep in touch through phone calls, updating each other on our lives. He seems to be enjoying his life abroad, which is a relief. I've heard that he plans to return for Christmas this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing him then. From now on, I'm determined to live my life to the fullest, cherishing every moment. I actually have a request for Rachel. One morning, my granddaughter Jody, who had just started elementary school, shyly brought something up.
Grandpa's birthday is coming up soon, right? Well, I want to make a lunch for him all by myself.
What an adorable surprise. Dylan is her grandfather and my husband. Jody, you really love Dylan so much, don't you? I wholeheartedly agreed with Jody's wonderful idea, and from that day on, Jody and I secretly started preparing the lunch box together. And then Dylan's birthday arrived.
I'll deliver the lunch to Grandpa. You can wait at home, Grandma.
Although I felt a little worried, I decided to see Jody off at the front door. It's about the same distance as to her school, so it should be fine. Still, her first errand being a surprise for him, what perfect timing. But an hour later, a phone call completely changed the situation. It was news that Jody had been involved in a traffic accident. In the hospital room we rushed to, she was quietly sleeping, looking like a completely different person from just an hour before. I was at a loss for words and simultaneously overwhelmed by intense regret and self-blame. Why did I let her go alone? Why didn't I convince her to wait just a little longer? Why at that time? It's all my fault. If I had been more careful, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. And on that day, Jody didn't wake up. We didn't say it out loud, but at that point, we were prepared to say goodbye to Jody. However, a miracle happened the next day. She regained consciousness. It was that afternoon. "Jody, how are you feeling?" Since Dylan, whom she adores, came to visit, there's no way Jody wouldn't be happy. Everyone thought so and felt at ease, but then…
Huh? Grandpa? Oh my God!
Jody's face grew paler and paler when she saw him. The next moment, as Dylan tried to approach Jody.
No! Don't come near me!
Jody dove under the covers, shaking, and started screaming and crying. Her strange behavior caused such a commotion that nurses came running from the nurses' station, and Dylan and I were kicked out of the room, still in a state of confusion. What in the world happened to those two who were always so close? Only she could knew the answer. I'm Rachel, a housewife in my 50s. I currently live with my husband Dylan, his daughter Carol, and granddaughter Jody. The story goes back about 5 years. 2 years before he passed away, Carol's husband had an abnormality detected during a health checkup, and his condition rapidly deteriorated after that. Despite his desperate treatments, he left this world at the young age of 31. Back then, whenever she was overwhelmed juggling her part-time job and supporting her husband, I would watch Jody at our house or go over to help with chores at her apartment. And after the funeral 3 years ago, "Hey Carol, if you'd like, why don't you come live with us? Our house is old, but I think it's better than dealing with everything alone." Dylan agrees too, so what do you think? I suggested that we live together. Much later, I found out that she herself had secretly wanted to live together too. But she thought it would be too selfish to ask for any more favors and had resigned herself to living with just Jody. But then, unexpectedly, I reached out to her. She said she felt a little guilty, but being able to feel like it was okay to depend on us seemed to put her mind at ease.
Mom, thank you. Jody and I will be in your care again.
There were tears in her eyes as she answered with a smile. Seeing that smile at that moment, I felt from the bottom of my heart that I was so glad I had found the courage to reach out to her. And that's how our current family structure came to be. She went from part-time to full-time employee and works late every day. In her place, I would pick up and drop off Jody at daycare, and when Jody caught a cold, I took her to the hospital and nursed her. To be honest, it was physically tough at times given my age, but strangely it never felt burdensome when I thought about doing it for adorable Jody. Jody started elementary school this spring. Seeing Jody happily carrying her brand new backpack on the way to school reminded me of Carol when she was little, and I was filled with even more love. At the same time, I felt deeply moved realizing that Jody had grown this much too. Jody was very attached to me, of course, but also to Dylan. This is just my guess, but I think Jody sees her late father in him. Because there were times when she showed expressions to Dylan that were clearly different from how she acted spoiled with her grandfather. Dylan himself had noticed this from an early stage too. He said that while it put him in a complex state of mind, he decided to accept the current situation as is if it meant Jody could live happily. I agree with Dylan's thinking. The most important thing is for Jody's mental well-being to be stable. The uneventful days, the peaceful days, we learned the hard way 3 years ago that those are the greatest happiness. Summer passed, and a change occurred in Jody after she turned 7. One early morning, as I was making lunch boxes for Dylan and Carol as usual, Jody woke up and came over.
Rachel, what are you doing?
Oh my, Jody. You're up quite early today. These are lunch for Dylan and Carol. They don't get school lunches like you do, so I make them lunch every day.
What? You make them all by yourself every single day?
Yes, that's right. You have a field trip coming up soon, right? I'll make yours then too.
Wow. I can't wait. Thanks, Rachel.
It was just an ordinary conversation. A normal morning where Jody just happened to wake up early. But I never imagined that this early rising would lead to what happened. From that day on, Jody started waking up early, saying she wanted to help make the lunch boxes. I thought waking up early was good for her health too, so it was a great opportunity. I agreed to Jody's proposal. The mornings I stood in the kitchen alongside Jody felt so refreshing and always brightened my mood. Jody herself seemed to start feeling joy as the scope of what she could help with expanded. To think that being directly involved in Jody's growth would make me this happy. Even at this age, there are still so many things I don't know. It started out as something for Jody's sake, but before I knew it, it had become a joy for me too. The field trip ended and the cold season arrived. Dylan's birthday was coming up soon. One morning, as the two of us were making lunch boxes as usual, Jody was fidgeting restlessly. Tilting my head wondering if something was up. Actually, I have a favor to ask you, Rachel. Jody broached the topic shyly. A favor? Oh my, what is it?
Well, Grandpa's birthday is coming up soon, right? And I want to make a lunch box for him all by myself.
Jody declared that she wanted to make a lunch box all by herself as a present for Dylan's birthday. What an adorable surprise. Jody really loves him so much. I wholeheartedly agreed to Jody's wonderful proposal, and we secretly planned the lunch box menu and practiced making the egg dishes that he loves, making sure he wouldn't notice. When Dylan later found out the reason why there were so many egg dishes for dinner during this time.
I see. So those egg dishes back then were for my sake,
he said with an embarrassed laugh. That smile on his face at that moment was a precious expression that even I, who had been with him for decades, rarely got to see. I thought this happiness would last forever. The morning of Dylan's actual birthday, Jody got to work making the lunchbox. Inside the lunchbox were cherry tomatoes and 2 sandwiches. And the boiled eggs she had secretly practiced making.
Let's see, boil the water. Is this enough?
You should put in a little more.
Got it. Then put in the eggs.
Since it was the real deal, Jody was cooking with even more care than usual. I supported her while getting ready so we would make it in time for her to leave. It must have been the result of helping out for months. Jody's lunch box making was going very smoothly. However, an unexpected event occurred here. A phone call came in for Hi, who was having breakfast in the living room.
Yes, hello. What? A ordering mistake? When did you find out? Oh, I see. Got it. I'll be right there, so have everything ready.
From his tone, I could immediately tell the person on the other end of the phone was his subordinate at work. And apparently some trouble had come up. Dylan poured his half-finished coffee into the sink and apologetically told Jody. It seems there's trouble at the company. I'm sorry, but I have to go right now.
What? But the lunch isn't ready yet. Can't you wait just a little longer? Sorry. If I don't go now, everyone will be in a bind. I'll eat this lunch for dinner.
But it's almost done. Jody's expression immediately darkened, feeling like the surprise had failed. She practiced so hard, and for it to fail like this. That's it. Not wanting Jody's feelings and hard work to go to waste, I hastily proposed to the two of them that we deliver the lunchbox once it was finished. It's Saturday and there's no school today. At my suggestion, Jody's face brightened again. And she jumped up and down happily.
That's right. We can just deliver it when the lunch is ready. I'll take it. Okay?
She pleaded, grabbing Dylan's right arm. That adorable gesture made even Dylan soften his expression for a moment, and he crouched down in front of Jody, gently patting her head.
That's true. Well then, can you bring it to me when it's done? I'll let the receptionist know too,
he replied. Jody became even more delighted.
Yeah, I'll definitely go.
Promise? She answered with a radiant smile.
Yeah, it's a promise.
And just as he declared, Dylan hurried off to the company. I wasn't sure how it would turn out for a moment, but it looks like we can safely deliver it. Now, let's put our all into the sandwiches and presentation too.
Yeah.
Although flustered by the unexpected event, it seemed the surprise lunchbox could be delivered as originally planned. Not just Jody, but I myself, who had been supporting her all along, breathed a sigh of relief. However, that carelessness was a mistake. After this, I would make the biggest blunder of my life. As soon as the lunch was finished making,
I want to go,
Jody immediately said to me. However, we so engrossed in making the lunch that we hadn't even eaten breakfast yet. Plus, there was a high possibility that the trouble at the company hadn't been resolved yet if we went right away. Worst case scenario, there was even a chance we wouldn't be able to see him. So, if we go right away, he might still be in the middle of work. So why don't the two of us have breakfast first? I suggested. But Jody wouldn't give in.
I want to give it to him right away,
saying. I tried to persuade Jody for a while, but she just wouldn't budge today of all days. She probably couldn't suppress her desire to give Dylan the lunch she made for him even a second sooner. It was the first time Jody had ever pleaded with me so desperately. This time, I had no choice but to give in. Still, her stubbornness sure is just like Dylan. Finding an unexpected commonality between Dylan and Jody, I chuckled to myself. Then I put the freshly made lunch and cutlery in the usual lunch bag. Well then, shall we go deliver it now? And said. She nodded happily and hugged the lunchbox tightly. But I need to get ready to go out, so can you wait just a little bit? I couldn't very well go to Dylan's company without doing my makeup and hair. So I asked Jody for time to do that. But Jody said,
I can go by myself, it's fine. You can make breakfast and wait, Rachel.
Then she put on her shoes and unlocked the front door.
Wait a minute, Jody.
I hurried to stop her, but Jody was already outside. I raised my voice a little. It's dangerous to go alone. I'll be done soon, so let's go together. And told Jody. Still, she wouldn't stop walking and said,
I've been there before, so it's okay. I'll take the lunch to Dylan. You can wait at home, Rachel.
As she got farther and farther from the house. At that moment, I thought that it might be impossible to stop Jody today. Though I was worried, I brushed it off thinking it's a distance that takes less than 15 minutes, and she walks the same distance to school every morning. I called out to Jody. Be careful of cars. Got it? And saw her off just like that. Jody smiled at me, waved energetically and replied,
Got it. I'm off then.
And headed happily towards him. I watched over her until she was out of sight. Truth be told, we had visited the company together a few times to drop off things he had forgotten. Once you get to the main street, you just cross at the light and go straight. It's pretty straightforward. On top of that, Jody had been begging me to let her run errands alone for a while now. Her first errand being a surprise lunch for Dylan. How wonderful is that? It was the perfect timing for Jody to accomplish what she wanted to do and give him a present all at once. At that moment, my heart was filled more with joy and a sense of accomplishment than worry. But an hour later, a phone call would drastically change the situation.
Hello? What? The hospital? No way. Is that true? Is there a chance it's the wrong person? Yes, I understand. I'll be right there.
It was news that Jody had been involved in a traffic accident. I rushed to the hospital I was told about and inquired at the reception desk. Then I was immediately guided to the intensive care unit. When I was reunited with Jody, her whole body was wrapped in bandages, with many tubes connected to her arms as she slept quietly. Seeing Jody, who looked like a completely different person from just an hour before, I was at a loss for words. At the same time, I thought to myself, it's my fault. If only I had forcibly stopped her back then. If I hadn't cared about my makeup or hair and had gone with Jody to the company as is. In the first place, if I hadn't said we would deliver it later, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. Words blaming myself like that kept popping into my head, and everything in front of me got darker and darker. How many minutes had passed since I arrived at the hospital? When I noticed, Carol and Dylan had arrived in front of the hospital room.
Carol, I'm so sorry. I've done something terrible. I'm sorry.
Mom, calm down. It's not your fault. Carol is right. Let's pray that Jody wakes up now. But it's because of me that I mustn't cry. I don't even have the right to cry. Even though I thought that, the overflowing regret welled up as tears and I couldn't stop them. And on this day, she did not wake up. We didn't say it out loud, but at this point we were prepared to say goodbye to Jody. However, a miracle happened the next day.
Jody, I'm so glad you woke up.
He had regained consciousness at dawn and was able to eat a little bit. Perhaps due to the impact of the terrible accident that happened to her, Jody's expression remained stiff, but fortunately, the possibility of any disabilities or after effects remaining was low. The accident he was involved in was caused by the driver running a red light. The car at fault collided with the victim who was in the middle of turning right, and the victim's car was blown onto the sidewalk. And waiting at the traffic light ahead was Jody. Perhaps it should be considered a small blessing in disguise, but thanks to the traffic light pole standing between Jody and the car, she was able to avoid a direct collision. Still, she hit her head hard when she fell over with the pole, so it was decided that she would have various examinations done afterwards. On this day, Carol and I made every effort to take care of Jody and provide emotional support from morning so that she wouldn't become anxious. In the morning, Jody's expression was stiff, but by the time the morning examinations were over, she started showing us smiles. Past noon, as visiting hours were coming to an end.
Jody, how are you feeling?
Dylan, who had worked hard to finish his job, had somehow made it in time for visiting hours. At this moment, Carol and I were thinking the same thing. We would get to see Jody's biggest smile of the day. Since Dylan, whom she especially loves among the family, came to visit, there's no way Jody wouldn't be happy. Everyone thought so and felt at ease, but then...
Dylan! Huh? What should I do?
Jody's face grew paler and paler.
Jody? What's wrong? Your face is ghostly pale.
We were simply bewildered by her unexpected reaction. But the one most perplexed was undoubtedly Dylan.
Jody, what's the matter? Are you okay? Look, I bought your favorite snacks.
The next moment, as Dylan said that and tried to approach Jody.
No! Don't come near me!
Jody dove under the covers, shaking, and started screaming and crying. Her strange behavior caused such a commotion that nurses came running from the nurses' station, and Dylan and I were kicked out of the room in a state of confusion. From beyond the closed door, we could faintly hear Jody's crying voice and Carol speaking to her gently.
Did I do something to Jody?
I have no idea what's going on either. For now, let's leave this to Carol and go home for now.
Yeah, you're right.
Supporting Dylan, who had completely lost his energy, we quietly left the hospital room that day. When night came, I asked Carol, who had stayed in the room, about her condition. After Dad left, she calmed down and there were no issues with her meal or exams. But she wouldn't tell me the reason she cried. She was still bewildered. With the cause unknown, Dylan was more dejected and down than anyone. Then Carol said,
I was thinking a little. Could it be that the reason is because she couldn't give Dad the lunchbox due to the accident? Maybe Jody thought Dad would get angry at her for that?
She spoke of a possible reason based on her behavior. Both Dylan and I strangely agreed with that reasoning. That certainly is a possibility. Then let's try talking to Jody about that tomorrow. If she knows Dylan isn't angry, Jody will feel at ease seeing him too.
Yeah, that's true. Well then, I'll leave it to you.
We became optimistic. However, in reality, it might not be such a simple story. The next day, Carol had work, so I went to see her alone. After the morning preparations and exam preparations were done and she had a moment to catch her breath, I decided to try bringing up the topic with Jody. Hey, Jody. About yesterday.
Yesterday?
You know, you cried saying you didn't want to see Dylan, right? I wanted to talk to you a little about that. Is that okay? When I broached the subject nervously, Jody's expression clouded over again. And as if running away from my words, she pulled the covers over herself and said,
No! Absolutely don't call him!
She became frightened. I hurriedly said,
Dylan isn't particularly angry, you know? So don't worry.
But it seemed my words didn't reach Jody's ears. In the end, he wasn't able to go see Jody on this day either. From then on, whenever I found an opportunity, I tried proposing a meeting with Dylan, but
No! Please don't bring him!
She would just cry, and days passed without not only a meeting but even knowing the reason. Seeing Jody so extremely frightened, there was even a time when Carol and I suspected that he himself might be the cause. I think it's unlikely, but is there a possibility that Dylan did something terrible to Jody? Like, saying things that cornered her mentally or disciplining her beyond reasonable limits. It's true that kind of incident gets reported on TV, but I don't think that's the case with Dad at all. He's always been consistently kind to me too. That's right. There's no way he would do something like that. Then what about him is Jody so afraid of? That's the thing. I tried consulting with the doctor, but they said her memory might be confused due to the shock of the accident, so it's better to wait until she recovers to resolve it. It might be tough on Dad, but he might have to be patient for a while. That's all we can do. For Jody's sake, let's all do what we can for now. Based on Dylan's personality and behavior up until now, it's unthinkable that he did anything terrible to Jody. But seeing how abnormally frightened she is, it's clear that something happened. We just never knew what it was. Is it confusion in her memory due to the shock of the accident, as the doctor says? If so, what in the world is Jody misunderstanding? The answer became clear the day before her discharge, several more weeks later. On this day, even though Jody's discharge had finally been decided, she had a somewhat gloomy look on her face. I immediately realized the reason was Dylan. Tomorrow, she'll go back to her normal life. But at this rate, the relationship between Dylan and Jody will become completely different from how it's been. This might be the last chance. I sat down in a nearby chair and asked Jody as slowly and gently as possible. Before you go home, there's something I want you to tell me. Can I ask? Jody seemed to realize what I was trying to ask with just that one sentence. Though she still looked frightened, she spoke the truth herself as if she had made up her mind.
Jody, do you remember what I promised Dylan?
Yes, of course. Then I guess it's no good after all. Even if I get discharged, I'll go straight to heaven where Papa is. The truth Jody told me was an incomplete story that was difficult to understand, like a young child's made-up tale. I decided to slowly coax out of Jody what she was afraid of and what she was trying to convey. At first, it's no use. I promised, so it's impossible. Jody just kept repeating, scared. But as I patiently talked to her, I noticed that Jody was fixated on a certain story. That story was one from a picture book Dylan had given Jody as a present when she was in kindergarten. The content was very simple. If you break a promise, a demon will appear and make you drink lots of needles as punishment.
I promised to deliver the lunchbox, but I couldn't keep it. So I'm going to be made to drink lots of needles. I was so scared that I hid so I wouldn't see him.
I see. But don't you think it'll be okay if you apologize to Dylan?
No way! The demon is about people who were lied to and are crying. So if I see Dylan, I'll be made to drink needles, so I can't see him.
It seemed Jody was convinced that the victim whose promise was broken would make the perpetrator drink needles. And in this case, apparently Dylan would be the victim and Jody the perpetrator. So she had convinced herself that he would come to make liar Jody drink needles. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at this adorable misunderstanding. What were all those days I agonized over, even doubting Dylan's kindness for a while? I realized I had made a huge misunderstanding just like Jody's misconceptions and assumptions, and couldn't stop laughing. Jody, who had been plagued by the greatest remorse and regret of her life, was simply bewildered by the sight of me laughing out loud. I apologized. Sorry, and gulped down the coffee I had been holding. Then, after catching my breath, I made a certain proposal to Jody. Then Jody replied,
"Oh, of course. Thank you, Rachel. I'll give it my best shot."
Her bright, radiant smile from before the accident returned. Seeing that smile, I was finally able to truly feel that we could go back to our usual life. The next day, there was no more anxiety or fear on Jody's face as she left the hospital room. It was sparkling with the joy of returning to a happy everyday life with nothing special, and the motivation for what she was about to do. A few days later on Saturday morning, Jody and I resumed making lunchboxes again. The menu for the first lunchbox after being discharged was the same as that day: cherry tomatoes and 2 sandwiches. And boiled eggs. Of course, only Jody was making it. Since it was her second try, Jody's skill had improved even more.
Okay, done. Now, let's have breakfast.
Yes, let's. As the two of us ate a proper breakfast, I recalled the conversation in the hospital room. Jody staring at me laughing loudly. I had proposed. Then let's make lunch and deliver it one more time. That way, it won't count as breaking the promise, right? To Jody. Thanks to that proposal back then, Jody completely regained her usual smile. And her relationship with Dylan was successfully repaired, leading to today's lunchbox. We're just delivering it, but we can't let our guard down. In order to avoid repeating the mistake of that day, Jody and I decided on a departure time in advance. Furthermore, I got myself ready before making the lunchbox, so I'd be prepared to head out anytime. Jody herself seemed to regret acting hastily, and was very calm today. But still, she probably couldn't overcome the feeling of impatience. She kept checking the clock. Not yet. She murmured disappointedly. I washed the dishes while keeping an eye on the clock, killing time. Then,
"Oh, look! It's time, right? Can I get ready?"
Jody raised her voice as if she had been waiting and came to report to me happily. I smiled. "All right, shall we go?" and replied. Then Jody carefully held the lunchbox and headed to the front door.
"Rachel, hurry, hurry!"
She put on her shoes and waited. I replied in a small voice, "Okay, okay," and went out the front door with Jody. Then the two of us walked side by side, holding hands, heading to the company where Dylan was waiting. When we arrived at the company, the receptionist guided us to his department. Usually we just hand over forgotten items at the reception, but today we could apparently go inside. Jody's expression as she set foot in the special space of the company was more tense than I had ever seen before. That expression was so adorable. Of course I and the receptionist were smiling.
"This is the department." "Well then, excuse me."
After exchanging a brief greeting, I immediately looked for Dylan. Then, from the back of the room,
"Jody!"
I heard Dylan's voice, and Jody happily looked towards the voice.
"Grandpa!"
As she called out to Dylan, Jody ran and flew into his chest, still holding the lunchbox. Then, with a confident smile,
"Here, your lunch." Jody made it all by herself. All alone.
She told him and handed the lunchbox to Dylan.
I see, I see. Jody made it all by herself. Thank you. Well then, I'd better eat it right away.
Dylan carefully held the lunch like a newborn baby and took us to a nearby break room. When the three of us sat down at the round table in the break room, Dylan opened the lid of the lunchbox. Then,
"Oh."
He let out a small cry of joy and brought the boiled egg to his mouth.
"Grandpa, is it yummy?"
Jody asked Dylan, looking a little worried. Then he said, "Yeah, it's delicious. The most delicious one I've ever eaten," and looked up at the ceiling. There were faint tears in his eyes.
"What's wrong? Are you okay?" "Yeah, of course. I was just surprised because Jody's lunchbox is so delicious. Then Jody will make your lunches from now on too. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it."
As I watched Jody and Dylan's exchange, I alone pondered the words "from now on." Peaceful everyday life and unfortunate events, like Carol's husband's illness and this accident, are always side by side. That's why, in order to continue having calm and peaceful days, we mustn't neglect doing our utmost for safety and consideration. And cherish living in this moment, now. That's what I thought. Being broke and useless is grounds for divorce. So said Matthew as he left the divorce papers on the table and walked out. I was left staring at those papers, dumbfounded, on my hospital bed. I had my suspicions for a while. But, to think he was actually cheating. And he's leaving me because I'm useless and can't earn money while hospitalized and because Alyson's pregnant? Mom? Startled, I looked up to find my precious son Harlan and my dad standing there. My dad looked at what I was holding and frowned. "What are you going to do?"
"There's only one thing to do."
With some persuasion, I managed an early discharge and headed to the bank where Matthew works. My dad, who drove me there, cheered me on.
"You can do it."
Then he dropped me off in front of the bank and drove away. As I entered the bank, Matthew, noticing me, frowned. Coincidentally, there were no other customers in front of Matthew. I approached him directly.
"I'm closing all the company accounts." "What?"
Let's show him whose daughter he's angered. While Matthew turned pale, I couldn't help but smirk. I am Sabrina, a 32-year-old corporate executive and mother of one. I have a 7-year-old son named Harlan and my husband's name is Matthew. Matthew and I met at a party thrown by mutual friends during our college days. Back then, we had no interest in each other and merely exchanged contact information. "Hey, weren't you at that party? Sabrina, right?" Oh, Matthew? The following year, by coincidence, I used the bank where he worked and we reconnected. That led to us keeping in touch regularly and eventually started dating. After I got pregnant with Harlan, we got married. Matthew was known for his serious and meticulous work, which made my friends envy that I had him as my husband. I, too, was happy to have married him.
Mom, why does this become this?
Hold on a sec. I don't know that much myself, so I'll look into it.
Okay.
Harlan, perhaps inheriting traits from Matthew, is studious and curious. He's always asking questions, which keeps me on my toes with my own studies.
What's this? Why?
Surprisingly, Harlan's admiration is not for Matthew but for my dad. My mother passed away from illness, and my dad, despite his busy work life, raised me as a single parent.
I'm sorry, but it's hard to get along with your dad. Well, it can't be helped, but don't say that to him. He's quite sensitive about it. No way, I could.
My dad is a kind man but looks intimidating and somewhat scary. Matthew is also not comfortable around him due to his appearance. My dad, aware of this, has always tried not to interfere too much. Thus, our life was peaceful at the beginning, a life that seemed full of promise. But that changed drastically after we got married.
Hey! Where did you put my mobile phone? Don't say it like I'm responsible for it.
Isn't it still on the charger? Right after waking up, Matthew would ask grumpily. Indeed, his mobile phone was where he left it charging the night before. No apologies or thanks from him, just a click of his tongue, which irritated me. Matthew changed after we got married. And whenever he had the chance, he would say this.
I'm an elite banker. Thanks to me, you're living a comfortable life.
Yet Matthew doesn't contribute financially at home. He spends his entire salary on himself, yet acts as if he's supporting the household. In reality, I'm the one supporting our family. I pay for all the utilities and groceries.
Hey! What's with these new clothes? They're for Harlan. He's outgrown his old ones. Don't spend my money on luxuries. I'm paying with my own salary. I don't even have access to your account.
Yet, if I take Harlan out for a meal or buy new clothes, he immediately complains. He seems to dislike any form of luxury, no matter how small. On the other hand, my dad is the type of person who's willing to spend money for our sake.
The apartment you're in now is too small, right? That's why I bought the condo you and Matthew wanted to live in. And it's not far from my place, so I could be close with you guys.
He said, laughing, and gave us the top floor as a gift. And to be there for us in times of need, he lives on a different floor in the same building.
Mom, can I go to Grandpa's? Of course, but just because it's the same building doesn't mean you can stay out late. Make sure you come back before it gets dark. Okay.
It might be natural for Harlan to be closer to his grandfather than his father, Matthew. Whenever he has the chance, Harlan goes to see my dad.
Where's Harlan?
At Dad's place. Is that so? Matthew never complains about my dad to him directly. And it seems he's careful not to say too much around Harlan, fearing he might tell my dad. It's just me he's bold with. Certainly, I keep quiet not to trouble my dad. Well, if it's just complaints, I can ignore them. That's how lightly I thought of it as. And so unlike my dad, Matthew doesn't participate in childcare at all.
I've been called out by Alyson, so I'm heading out.
What? Again? And it's Matthew's childhood friend Alyson who's stealing away his time from childcare. I dislike her, more than just being uncomfortable around her. Matthew and I are like siblings. So please don't misunderstand. Every time she meets me, she would say something like that. Yet, she always tries to assert her dominance.
Matthew used to be.
As if she knows Matthew better than I do, which is just annoying. Valeria, Matthew's mother-in-law, also dotes on Alyson, which complicates things further.
Why did Matthew choose such a woman instead of Alyson? He should have married Alyson.
When called to my in-laws, Valeria made sure to say such things loud enough for me to hear. John, my father-in-law, always scolds her for it, but she doesn't seem to care. Alyssyn claims to be a natural airhead.
I'm just a natural airhead, that's why I rely on Matthew so much. I don't mean to make Sabrina uncomfortable.
This might be okay if she were younger. But she's 28, not exactly young. It's time she acted her age. The reason she and Matthew didn't end up together is because of John.
I don't want such a woman even as an in-law. If it really comes down to it, I'll divorce you.
Alyssyn can hardly be called as a good person. She's notorious for playing around with men and doesn't work either. Whatever she wants, she gets Matthew to buy for her. John despises Alyssyn and strongly opposed their relationship. I could never understand why Valeria adores Alyssyn so much.
I'm sorry for my wife's behavior. It's not something you should apologize for, John. Matthew too. To not defend his wife from such remarks, and instead, being friendly with such a woman.
True to John's words, no matter what Valeria says about me, Matthew never defends me. Sometimes, he even laughs.
Why do you say those things, Grandma? If Mom and Dad hadn't met, I wouldn't be born. Does that mean I'm an unwanted child to you, Grandma?
No, that's not true at all. Harlan always stands up for me in place of Matthew. Harlan may not understand how children are made, but he knows they can't be born without both parents. Valeria adores her brilliant grandson, so she refrains from making such remarks in front of Harlan. In that aspect, Valeria and Matthew are very alike, making it seem they really are related.
I have plans to drink with Alyssyn tonight, so I'll be home late. Oh, really?
Gradually, I started to wonder if Matthew was necessary for us at all. And I began preparing for divorce. Harlan seemed to sense something too.
If there's anything I can help with, just let me know,
he said, showing concern for me. Then, I was summoned by Valeria. I really didn't want to go, but she kept calling persistently enough that it would affect my work if I didn't show up.
John is away on business, so there's no one to carry heavy things.
Can you buy some rice? Apparently, John was on a business trip. I wanted to tell her to just order it online, but saying that would clearly lead to an argument. After being tasked with carrying heavy items after work, I was exhausted. As I was heading back to the condo in a daze, my body was thrown by a car. It seems a car that ran a red light hit me.
The driver who hit you fled the scene, and we're currently investigating.
I was informed while lying in a hospital bed. For now, I left Harlan in my father's care and decided to stay in the hospital for a while. I broke my arm, so I couldn't work properly in this state. When I was being worried about such things, my dad scolded me.
First, worry about your own health.
Harlan, my father, and John, who came back in a hurry after hearing about the accident, visited me frequently, but Matthew and Valeria did not visit me at all. Well, that was within my expectations.
Coming in. What?
So, I was surprised when Matthew showed up in my hospital room.
Sign this.
Matthew presented me with divorce papers. Already signed by him, with Valeria's name as a witness.
With that arm, you won't be able to work. Now that you can't make money, you're useless to me. What is that supposed to mean? And besides, Alyssyn is pregnant with my child.
My thoughts froze at those words. Alyssyn is pregnant with Matthew's child.
I'm going to marry Alyssyn. So just sign this quickly.
Saying that, Matthew turned his back on me. As if I was of no further use to him.
Being broke and useless is grounds for divorce,
Matthew said as he left the divorce papers on the table and walked out. I was left staring at those papers, dumbfounded, on my hospital bed. I had my suspicions for a while. But, to think he was actually cheating. And he's leaving me because I'm useless and can't earn money while hospitalized and because Alyssyn's pregnant?
Mom?
Startled, I looked up to find my precious son Harlan and my dad standing there. My dad looked at what I was holding and frowned.
What are you going to do? There's only one thing to do.
I answered while looking straight at my dad. My dad nodded in agreement. Well then, let's fight back. With some persuasion, I managed an early discharge and headed to the bank where Matthew works. My dad, who drove me there, cheered me on.
You can do it.
Then he dropped me off in front of the bank and drove away. As I entered the bank, Matthew, noticing me, frowned. Coincidentally, there were no other customers in front of Matthew. I approached him directly.
I'm closing all the company accounts. What?
Matthew's expression clearly said, "What are you talking about?" Without taking a number, I stood directly at the counter, noticing a few annoyed glances from others.
Oh, excuse me. Maybe you didn't understand without the company name. What are you?
I'm Sabrina Gibney. I recently took over my father and became the CEO. The company is Gibney Corporation.
What the?
Gibney Corporation is an IT company my father founded, now employing 1,900 staffs, and is quite well known in this area and within the industry due to its rapid growth in one generation. That's why Matthew was so surprised.
That's a lie, right? You're just trying to get back at me.
If you think so, why don't you check? Matthew started checking something immediately at my words. While he was busy, I looked around. Having mentioned the company name, the surrounding people were now paying attention to us.
Oh my God, what? No way.
It seemed he had confirmed it. Matthew looked up at me hesitantly.
You're really from that Gibney Corporation?
Let's show him whose daughter he has angered. Contrary to Matthew's pale face, I smirked unpleasantly.
That's right, so please proceed with the cancellation quickly. Wait, if you cancel all at once like this. By the way, my father is quite angry about this matter as well. Quickly pack your things and leave the apartment. What? Why should I be the one to leave?
It seems Matthew had forgotten that the apartment was purchased by my father, and the ownership was in my father's name. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought Alyssa in while I was hospitalized and still be living there.
Forgot? That apartment was bought by my father, the former president. You haven't contributed any money, let alone for living expenses. You've been spending everything on your childhood friend and mistress, Alyssa. In fact, you've been living on my salary. Who do you think has been supporting your lifestyle? Well, about that. And now, because she's pregnant, you expect me to hand over the apartment to you and your mistress? How much more do you intend to insult me?
I made sure to speak loudly enough for those around to hear. And of course, Matthew was flustered. After all, he's known for being serious. That he, of all people, wouldn't contribute financially at home and was cheating with a childhood friend. The looks we received from those around us turned cold.
Is that true? What?
The one who approached me was Ogden, the branch manager of this bank. He had been here for a while, listening to our conversation. I believe we need to have a detailed discussion. I am very sorry for the inconvenience caused by our bank employee. And with that, Ogden offered a deep apology. Following this, I was taken to the back to discuss further with Matthew, Ogden, and myself. There, I explained the situation to Ogden in detail. I am terribly sorry for the trouble our employee has caused. Ogden sighed deeply and apologized again. Next to him, Matthew sat looking displeased, and to that, Ogden forcibly grabbed his head to make him apologize. I understand your feelings, Sabrina. It's natural not to want to entrust your money to a bank that employs such people. If you're considering closing your account, we can arrange that. I am no longer his wife. If you accept one condition, I might reconsider closing the account. The two of them looked up hopefully at my words. It was a good deal for Ogden, but the worst possible condition for Matthew. If you fire Matthew here, I would like to continue my contract with this bank.
What?
Of course. We were actually planning to let him go. It seemed Ogden had already intended to do so. Matthew, initially confused, gradually turned red in the face. As he was about to say something.
Excuse me, but Sabrina's father has arrived.
Another bank employee approached us. I had asked Ogden to let him in, thwarting Matthew, who, frustrated, closed his mouth.
Why do I have to be here? What? Mom?
Sorry for making you wait. Dad entered, firmly holding Valeria's arm. Valeria, looking displeased, glared at me upon seeing me.
This is your doing. What are you trying to accomplish? I'll never forgive you for treating your mother-in-law like this. Quiet.
As Valeria began to shout, my dad fiercely scolded her. Giving an even more intimidating look, he managed to silence them.
I know you've been harassing my daughter. Calling her for trivial tasks, making her carry heavy things. Despite this, instead of showing gratitude, you prefer to listen and you made sure my daughter heard it. And Matthew, far from defending, laughed, and even Harlan had to step in to protect her.
My dad's angry voice echoed through the bank. Matthew tried to intervene but remained silent under my dad's stern gaze.
And I'm aware that Alyson is the one who hit Sabrina. That woman has already been arrested by the police. Could Alyson really have done such a thing? Why are you surprised? You're the mastermind.
My dad scolded at her even more. Meanwhile, Matthew, seemingly unaware, froze in shock.
What? You both are the worst. Sabrina, let's go. Yes.
Prompted by my dad, we headed outside. Ogden followed, apologizing repeatedly. Thinking I might continue the contract with Ogden in charge, we heard Matthew and Valeria arguing loudly behind us. It seemed they were blaming each other. Their voices could be heard outside, and the customers and bank employees who were present whispered that what they had heard was true.
Just as planned. Yes. They reacted just as we expected, which helped.
Our plan had gone smoothly, and we left the bank laughing confidently. As a result, Matthew was indeed fired. Thanks to the police conducting a thorough investigation, Alyson received a prison sentence. As for Valeria, she was forced to divorce John after it was discovered she had instigated Alyson to run me over in an attempt to get rid of me. Valeria was also taken into custody by the police.
Welcome back, Mom, Grandpa.
I'm home. Thank you for looking after Harlan, John.
No problem.
Seems like you've settled everything at the bank. After cornering Matthew and his accomplices at the bank, I went to pick up Harlan, whom I had left with John. John had helped a lot this time too. He found evidence that Valeria was instigating Alyson and discovered notes about their plan to eliminate me, which he handed over to the police. When I thanked him for everything, John said with a smile,
"You did great."
Since then, my days have become busier than ever. Being busy as a next-in-line president and a board member already, becoming president has added even more responsibility on me due to Matthew. And as for my dad, he started a new company.
"I've always wanted to start a new company,"
he said, pushing the presidency onto me, eager to show Matthew up. Because of that, both my father and I became busy, so John has been looking after Harlan. Apparently, John's business trip was forced upon him because Valeria was having an affair with his boss. He took early retirement and moved into a vacant apartment in our building.
I'm currently studying about remote work.
Planning to eventually entrust him with work, I've sent someone knowledgeable his way. He seems very capable, so I'd like him to excel in my new company. It seems my dad and John got along very well after this incident, often visiting each other's apartments to drink and chat. On the other hand, Matthew, having been driven out, returned to his empty family home. Unable to find employment at any bank with rumors spread by my dad and I everywhere, he was left unemployable, forced to pay me compensation through debts. Now, spending his days tirelessly working part-time jobs, he came crying to us, but we collectively ignored him. Once rumored to be on the fast track to becoming a branch manager, he has fallen far.
When I grow up, I want to be like Grandpa.
Harlan has come to respect my dad even more after this incident. Seeing him as a hero for rescuing us from the malicious acts of Matthew and Valeria. Would you take over for Grandpa someday? Yes. Hearing Harlan's willingness to follow in his footsteps, my dad was overjoyed. Determined not to be outdone by my father, I resolved to work even harder. Eventually, both my company and my father's company settled down. Oh, welcome home, Mom. Welcome back, looks like you worked hard. When I come home exhausted, I find John had already prepared dinner for us. I helped today too. Really? That's great, Harlan. I'm looking forward to dinner. Praising Harlan's effort with a smile, my dad also returned home late. Then, the four of us sat around the dining table, chatting and eating dinner together. In stark contrast to us, Matthew and his accomplices were scattered. Matthew piled up debts upon debts, eventually becoming indebted to a loan shark. And I heard rumors he was put on a ship. Matthew's family home was sold to pay off his debts, and Valeria, now without a place to go, was spotted living under a bridge by an acquaintance. By the way, I received an apology letter from Alyson's parents. They're good people, I hope you'll read it. If you say so, John. According to the letter from Alyson's parents, she gave birth in prison. They took the child in, and after Alyson's release, they moved away to ensure she wouldn't rely on them. The letter contained deep apologies to me. Alyson's parents seem like very good people. I sincerely hope the child grows up to resemble their grandparents rather than their parents. Nonetheless, Alyson too has lost a place to return to. I hope she reflects on her sins in her solitude. Time passed by and it had been 10 years since the divorce. We've grown without being troubled by Matthew. Did I even have a dad? Apparently, he vaguely remembers Matthew's existence but considers irrelevant to his life. And I too have completely forgotten about his existence. I've decided to take over Grandpa's company after all. If that's what you've decided, I won't object. Harlan chose to inherit my dad's company, which was originally a company making toys. Starting as an ordinary employee, Harlan is valued for his constant flow of ideas. Maybe it's time to leave the company in Harlan's hands. My dad would say so in a laugh. Once he hands over the company to Harlan, he plans to live a quiet life in the countryside. I'm also finding a successor and teaching them my job earnestly. Once they've grown enough, I too might consider early retirement and start a new path. With that thought of future in mind, I will continue to work as the CEO. Standing is common sense for a daughter-in-law. I had been preparing food and welcoming guests since the morning at a family gathering. Being 9 months pregnant, I was taking a short break on the sofa in the back. When my mother-in-law, Susan, found me sitting, her expression changed drastically as she approached me and snapped those words. Susan, I'm sorry. I'm just having some discomfort in my stomach. Unable to stand due to the pain, I apologized while remaining seated on the sofa. As I struggled to get up, Susan, seeming to give up, turned to leave but then shockingly kicked my stomach. Susan, how could you? I immediately curled up to protect my stomach, and fortunately, I didn't feel much pain. It's your useless body that's the problem. This was a line I was all too familiar with after always being oppressed, but I was left speechless by the shock of being kicked in the stomach. Someone, who had been silently watching this scene, waited until Susan was seated, and then. My name is Anne. I'm a 32-year-old housewife. I live happily with my husband Tom and our 3-year-old son. I am currently 9 months pregnant with our second child. Before the pregnancy was confirmed, it was decided that Tom would be transferred to work abroad alone. Although Tom insisted on staying in America, I didn't want him to give up his dream of working overseas, a goal since our dating days. After I encouraged him to the end, he promised to go abroad for just 3 years, and then he left. While I felt joy in supporting my husband's dream, there was one concern. The insidious harassment from Susan and Mike, my father-in-law. While Tom was around, they adored us, but in his absence, they subjected me to daily verbal abuse. Since Susan and Mike were kind in front of Tom, I always tried to bring him along. But for the next 3 years, I'll have to endure their malicious harassment alone, which is disheartening. However, I couldn't discuss it with Tom, knowing it would only add to his worries and considering Susan's feelings towards her son. Initially, I tried to please them by complying with everything, but no matter what, I only faced their resentment.
All I want is to get along with Mike and Susan.
Desiring a peaceful relationship with Susan and Mike, one day, I finally broke down and decided to be submissive. Then I heard shocking words from them.
"You stole our precious son from us."
That's what Susan declared.
"Ever since you married our son, he hardly pays any attention to us."
I finally understood the root of their relentless harassment. Susan and Mike were so overly fond of their son that they were jealous of me, his wife.
"If that's the case, I can always come with him."
Startled by Susan's unexpected confession, I tried to find a solution and offered various suggestions.
"The best thing would be for you to leave our son alone."
"Right.
Then he might return his love to us."
I was stunned by Susan's wish. The thought of them wanting a divorce because they felt their son's affection for them had diminished gave me chills. And this distorted expression of their love even scared me.
"Don't you like the idea of your son building a new family?"
I asked tentatively.
"New family?
That's ridiculous.
Our family is enough. No matter how old our son gets."
Realizing the extraordinary love they had for their only son, my husband, I was speechless.
"I love my husband. I want to get along with you and Susan, but I have no intention of leaving him."
Normally quiet, this was one point I could not concede. Seeing my resolve, Susan scoffed and retorted.
"Are you so confident that no matter how we treat you, you won't leave?"
From that day on, their harassment only intensified instead of diminishing. At one point, knowing I was allergic to shrimp, they sneakily added it to the fried food. I was about to eat it when my husband, who always harped on about my allergy, noticed and warned me.
"Shrimp? I'm sorry. Actually, this was a gift. I forgot you can't have shrimp."
Susan apologized to me repeatedly, making excuses. My husband seemed satisfied and asked her to be more careful in the future. But even as they spoke, Susan was stepping on my foot under the table. Amidst such harassment, we were leading a peaceful life when my husband's transfer overseas was confirmed. Susan and the others turned pale with shock as I celebrated.
"Overseas. That's going to be hard on the child and Anne, right?"
My father-in-law, Mike, really just not wanting to be separated from them, used me as an excuse. My husband said it was a decision we made together, and I knew the anger would soon be directed at me.
"And did you even consider my grandchild's feelings?"
Unsatisfied with my decision, Susan interrogated me like it was an inquisition. Fed up, my husband finally spoke out.
"Both of you, enough. Working abroad has always been my dream. And is just supporting me in that."
He immediately defended me.
"We support you too. But now just isn't the right time, is it?"
Mike seemed a bit sorry, yet unable to agree.
"That's right. The grandchild is only 3 years old. It's too much for Anne."
Susan, for once, seemed to be on my side, using my name in her argument.
"I'm fine. Tom and I have discussed it and decided to go for it."
I spoke up, my voice trembling slightly, trying to act bravely so my husband wouldn't worry. Realizing our determination, Susan and Mike reluctantly accepted it, though with a sense of defeat. That night, feeling sorry towards Susan and Mike, my husband suggested we all have dinner together. I had been avoiding eating with them since the shrimp allergy incident, but I decided to endure it for my husband's sake.
"Then let us, the ladies, get busy preparing in the kitchen. You relax."
Susan, excited to cook for her son after a long time, went into the kitchen. Hesitant to be alone with her, I steeled myself and followed her to the kitchen.
"Aren't you afraid our son might leave you when he returns from abroad?"
Susan's words, still hoping for our breakup, drained the blood from my face. Realizing it was pointless to engage, I silently started preparing. While we were working on different ingredients, Susan called out to me.
"And that pot over there is cool. Could you take it to the table?"
Busy with preparations, I followed Susan's instructions and grabbed the pot handle with my bare hands, only to let go immediately from the scorching heat. A pot of steaming hot beef stew fell right at my feet. I burned my hands and feet. Hearing my scream, my husband and Susan rushed over.
"And did you touch it with your bare hands? I told you to be careful of burns. What should we do now?"
Susan pretended to panic, but did nothing. My husband, seeing this, quickly instructed to bring a towel and ice. He also told Mike to call an ambulance. Seeing my red, swollen hands and feet, I could only cry in pain and frustration, clinging to my husband. Thanks to his quick thinking, I received proper treatment at the hospital and was told it would take 2 weeks to heal. Slowly, my spirit was breaking from Susan's escalating insidious bullying. As time passed and my husband's departure overseas approached, I made sure to avoid Susan and the others completely. Despite their vengeful attempts to visit our home or call multiple times a day, I never responded. For their excuses to see their grandchild, I sent pictures with messages. To my husband, I told him the reason for not seeing Susan was because of severe pregnancy symptoms, which he understood. Half a year passed, and the annual family gathering, highly valued by my husband's family, drew near. Knowing its importance, and though my husband said I didn't have to attend, I decided to go. I informed Susan of my attendance in advance through a message. Her reply, seemingly eager to finally vent her frustrations on me, brought back the flashbacks of my burn injury accident and filled me with more fear. Then, the day arrived when everyone was to gather. I briefly greeted Susan and Mike, then spent most of my time with relatives of my age, keeping my distance.
Standing is common sense for a daughter-in-law.
I had been preparing meals and welcoming guests since the morning at the family gathering. Being 9 months pregnant, I took a rest on a sofa in the back. When Susan saw me sitting, she changed her expression and came over to me, throwing those words at me.
"Susan, I'm sorry. I'm just having some discomfort in my stomach."
Unable to stand due to the pain, I apologized but couldn't get up from the sofa. Seeing that I couldn't stand, Susan, seeming to give up, turned to leave, but then shockingly, she turned back and kicked my stomach.
"Susan, how could you?"
I immediately curled up to protect my stomach, and luckily, the pain was minimal.
"It's your useless body that's at fault."
I was used to being oppressed by her, but I was left speechless and shocked by being kicked. Someone, who had been silently watching this scene, waited until Susan was seated, and then,
"Mom, what did you just do to an on the sofa?"
someone shouted loudly, making everyone, including me, turn towards the voice. There stood my husband, who was supposed to be overseas for work.
"Tom."
Susan uttered his name in a trembling voice. Painfully, I stood up from the sofa and slowly moved towards my husband.
"What did you do to and just now?"
he asked Susan, with an expression I had never seen before.
"Tom, why are you here?"
Until the previous day, my husband had apologized over the phone, saying he couldn't get a long leave and wouldn't be able to attend. I couldn't ask him to accompany me, knowing he had just been transferred overseas. Anne. I came back to surprise everyone. Tom's face softened as he looked at me, his expression changing completely from before. He rushed over to me, hugged me around my shoulders, and supported me.
"But when I came back, I happened to see Mom and you having that interaction from the entrance."
He had been frozen for a while, not understanding the situation as he had never seen Susan like that before.
"I was about to ask and what happened when Mom kicked her."
Hearing this, I realized he had witnessed Susan kicking my stomach. Looking up at my husband, I could see the anger in his eyes.
"Tom, this is..."
Relatives started gathering in the room, sensing the unusual tension, making the situation even more strained.
"Tom, everyone is here, let's talk in the other room."
Susan tried to calm my husband with a quiet voice, attempting to defuse the situation.
And you don't need to say anything. I want to hear it directly from Mom.
Saying this, my husband turned his face towards Susan again.
No, let's hear it here, in front of everyone.
The relatives, stunned by my husband's raised voice, watched the unfolding situation in silence. The commotion got Mike and Mike's brother's attention, who had organized the family gathering.
What's all this commotion about?
Seeing the unusual situation, Mike hurried to Susan's side. Upon realizing his beloved son was there in front of him, Mike looked even more shocked.
Dad, it's been a while. I didn't want our reunion to be like this, but I just saw something unbelievable.
With Mike's presence, my husband regained some composure and continued in a calm voice.
What happened?
Mike looked slightly uneasy. He already knew Susan had done something to me. Having always turned a blind eye to Susan's bullying, he was part of it too.
It was just, and I were talking.
Susan stubbornly refused to admit she had kicked me, trying to get out of this situation. However, my husband quietly glared at her, wanting her to confess. Sensing the conversation wasn't progressing, I finally spoke up.
You kicked me in the stomach, didn't you?
I finally revealed in front of everyone that Susan had kicked my stomach. Hearing this, the relatives began murmuring.
And what an accusation! I would never do such a thing.
Susan shouted, flustered.
Never. What, Mom? I saw it with my own eyes.
My husband expressed his frustration and anger at Susan's denial and her true nature. As he seemed about to confront Susan, I urged him desperately to stay calm.
Tom, are you sure it wasn't a misunderstanding? Susan doing such a thing.
Mike continued to defend Susan until the end. Hearing this, my husband's suspicion only deepened.
Dad, even now, you're siding with Mom?
My husband was speechless at Mike's attitude, seemingly more afraid of Susan facing critical judgment than the fact she had kicked me.
Tom.
I could only hold his hand tightly. The ease with which his parents dismissed their daughter-in-law raised my husband's suspicions, bringing up a question in his mind.
Anne. This isn't the first time, is it?
My husband's intuition seemed to pick up on something from Susan's behavior. Trying not to worry him, I felt both frustrated and relieved that my strongest ally had finally appeared, bringing tears to my eyes. Realizing this wasn't the first incident, my husband asked,
Mom, what terrible things have you done to Anne?
His anger not subsiding but intensifying. The relatives intervened to stop Tom as he approached Susan and Mike.
Tell everyone here what pain you've caused, Anne.
As Susan heard this, her face turned pale. And she collapsed to the ground.
Tom, it's too harsh to treat Susan like this in her condition.
Mike began to show anger towards Tom.
Harsh? Then what about that burn?
Susan and I were shocked, as if our thoughts had paused for a moment. And the one who raised his voice upon hearing this was, surprisingly, Mike's brother.
And was burned?
Mike's brother, who had been quietly observing what he thought was a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issue, spoke up for the first time, surprised by the unexpected development.
It seemed strange to me. That day, Anne got a severe burn holding a pot of just done beef stew with her bare hands.
My husband had been troubled by the fact that I had done something I would never normally do.
And would always check if it's safe before handling a pot with her bare hands if it were her own decision.
I always had a habit of double-checking everything. Whether it was cooking or leaving the house, which my husband knew well. So, it seemed odd to him that I would grab the pot without thinking.
The beef stew was made by Mom. Did she say something at that time?
As he pressed for answers, Susan and Mike fell silent. Some relatives defended Susan, while others expressed disbelief. I decided to reveal everything.
That time, Susan said it was cool, right?
I repeated Susan's words with courage. I explained how I was busy with my own cooking preparations that day and took Susan's words at face value without checking the pot.
I regret not verifying and ended up getting burned.
I admitted my mistake. Hearing this, Susan's expression changed, and she glared at me, shouting,
You are just trying to slander us. What kind of daughter-in-law are you?
Susan, who had been subdued, became enraged when faced with me.
I'm not stupid. I have saved our interactions as evidence.
I had secretly been collecting evidence of Susan and Mike's insidious harassment, in case I couldn't endure it any longer. My husband showed a surprised expression, then I said,
Tom, I'm sorry I kept quiet. I didn't want to worry you, and I was afraid of ruining your relationship with Susan and Mike.
The root of his parents' harassment stemmed from their affection for their beloved son. It was a twisted love, but I wanted to avoid worsening the relationship between Tom, who had been raised with much love from his parents. Susan and Mike, not expecting that I had been considerate of them, turned pale upon hearing this.
Mom, Dad, did you hear? Even after all this, and was still thinking of us.
Tom apologized to me, ashamed that he hadn't realized the situation.
And I'm so sorry my parents made you suffer this much.
Tom apologized with tears, and Susan, as if regretting how things turned out, exclaimed,
No, it's wrong. It's her fault. She stole our precious son.
It was the moment Susan's true nature was revealed. The relatives around us looked on with cold eyes. Even Mike, considering his brother's reputation, tried to stop Susan's outburst. Who stole me from you? Are you doing all this to and because of me? My husband was speechless. Not expecting such a distorted form of love where Susan's harassment was a retaliation for his affection being directed towards his new family.
I'm grateful for how you raised me. But the most important thing to me now is and our family.
He expressed his feelings to Susan and Mike. He then shared how much respect and consideration we had always shown towards Susan and her family.
Mom, Dad, I wanted you to see the irreplaceable love of your grandchildren and Anne's admiration for you.
Moved by their son's desperate plea, Susan and Mike seemed to finally realize the gravity of the situation, and Mike collapsed on the spot.
Mom and Dad, you've destroyed your own daughter-in-law's love and my trust with your own hands.
Hearing this, Susan, realizing for the first time that she had disappointed her precious son, broke down in tears. Seeing Susan crying and distraught, a part of me felt sorry for her outburst. But more so, I felt a sense of relief in her taking responsibility for this mess. Mike's brother, changing the dire atmosphere, intervened.
All right, this isn't a spectacle. The four of you, please move to a quieter room.
With those words, the other relatives awkwardly dispersed. Receiving words of sympathy and encouragement, I began to relax a bit. Supported by my husband's arm, we moved to a quieter room as Mike's brother suggested. Once the four of us were inside, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. My husband still had questions for them, eagerly wanting to confront them. However, Susan and Mike looked so exhausted that he hesitated to speak. Then, Mike's brother entered the room.
Now we can have a calm discussion. Is it true that Anne was subjected to insidious bullying?
With a stern expression, Mike's brother asked directly. After a moment of contemplation, Mike finally nodded in resignation. Triggered by Mike's acknowledgement, my husband burst out.
To think my parents would do this while Anne was protecting our child and unborn baby, it's shameful.
He voiced all the accusations as if speaking on my behalf. He revealed that the shrimp allergy, the burn, and the kicking were all acts of spite towards me.
I can't understand how Dad and Mom could hurt Anne to such an extent.
Disappointed beyond imagination, my husband's disillusionment deepened. Then, Mike's brother brought an end to the discussion.
Tom, that's enough. As your uncle, I'm deeply sorry for such a shameful sibling. I can't forgive what they've done.
He apologized to us, then rushed to Mike and struck him on the cheek.
As your brother, I cannot forgive your actions. Don't show your face at family events anymore.
He then instructed Susan and Mike to leave immediately. Susan and Mike seemed to want to say something to me, but the fact that they had kicked me remained unchanged. I ignored their expressions and stayed close to my husband's side. Once Susan and Mike were out of sight, I finally felt a sense of closure and, perhaps relieved, I broke down crying. I don't remember much about what happened next, but my husband stayed by my side until the end. After the revelation of Susan's insidious bullying, my husband forbade any contact or visits from them. This helped me avoid seeing Susan, and gradually, my emotional wounds began to heal. The overseas transfer that was supposed to last 3 years was cut short by my husband, who didn't want to be away any longer. He returned to America after just 1 year. Initially, I was a bit apprehensive, but I supported his return, prioritizing the safe birth of our second child. Now, we are eagerly awaiting the birth of our second child as a family of 3. Susan still sends daily messages of apology, wanting to mend our relationship. When I express my fear of seeing them, my husband continues to prioritize my feelings. The relatives also talk about how haggard Susan looks now. And the general consensus is that it's their own fault. In a situation where my husband and relatives are on my side, there's not much Susan and Mike can do. So, once our second child is born, I plan to show them the baby. However, I have no intention of repairing the relationship with Susan and Mike. I'm resolved to spend an ordinary life with our family of 4, combining our strengths.
My Emily is the cutest in the venue, isn't she?
Daniel said with a laugh, addressing Emily. Even though I'm right in front of them, this is how they treat me. It seems nothing but a joke to me. Then Emily, seeing me, burst out laughing.
What? Your wife is ugly.
That's it, I can't take it anymore.
I'm calling off the marriage.
I said that straight to Daniel. My name is Addison. I'm turning 29 this year. I've always loved numbers, and now I work in general affairs. I think this job suits my serious nature. Currently, I'm intensely studying for a qualification. The man I was supposed to marry is named Daniel. I met Daniel at a party. I had never been in a relationship with a man before. I lacked confidence and couldn't initiate conversations with men. As my friends began marrying off, I started attending parties in a rush. That's when I got accustomed to parties and met Daniel. My first impression of Daniel was that he was cool and refreshing. When we talked at the party, I enjoyed conversing with him a lot. Daniel, an elite at a major pharmaceutical company, is the same age as me. Even his academic background is impeccable. Yet, he's unpretentious and always brings up fun topics. I mistook his familiarity with women as just an act at first. Eventually, we became a couple. I was surprised that I could become a couple with him. I thought I had used up all my luck and love for being chosen by such a wonderful person. When we became a couple, he smiled at me and said, "I'm so glad you chose me. I'm such a lucky guy." But really, I was the one chosen by him. So I said, "I'm super happy too. But why did you choose me?" I asked him. I was genuinely insecure about being a match for someone as great as him. But he just laughed and replied, "I like girls who aren't experienced with guys and seem pure. You're my ideal." "Then that's great. Looking forward to being with you," I said, smiling back at him. After that, he regularly asked me out on dates. On our 3rd date, he confessed, and we started dating. Half a year later, he proposed. I liked him, so I immediately said yes. "That's great. Let's be happy together," he said with a smile. Living for 29 years, I had finally grasped happiness. I would become even happier after getting married. I believed so. But my expectations crumbled to nothing. Because after we got engaged and started living together, he changed. While dating, "Addison, you're really cute. My princess." He always praised me with a smile. But now, that's a thing of the past. Lately, he's always belittling me. For instance, the day after we started living together. I got up earlier than him that day and started preparing breakfast. I planned to do my makeup before leaving for work, so I was cooking without it. When breakfast was ready and set on the table, he woke up. I called out to him with a smile.
"Good morning, Daniel. Breakfast is ready, let's eat together."
Then he, seeing me, yelled in surprise.
"What an awful face you have. A woman without makeup in the morning isn't a woman. At least make yourself presentable,"
he shouted, furrowing his brow. His eyes were like those looking at something filthy. In a panic, I retorted. "I was going to do my makeup later. Isn't that too harsh? You used to call me cute before we got engaged." I was shocked by his words. But he just laughed and added insult to injury.
"It was just flattery to get married. Honestly, any woman with a decent income who'd do as I say would have been fine,"
he said, laughing. That's... I was so shocked that I dropped my fork. At that point, I wondered if I should really marry him, but we had already paid a deposit for the wedding venue. Besides, there was no guarantee of finding another partner if I let him go. I had no romantic prospects before meeting him. And maybe, just maybe, he might return to his kinder self. Holding on to that faint hope, I had no choice but to endure his harsh words. His behavior and words became increasingly unbearable, especially concerning finances. He stopped contributing to our previously split living expenses.
"Could you please contribute to the living expenses? It's tough for me to cover everything with my salary alone,"
I pleaded with him on a day off. But he half-heartedly dismissed me.
"The wedding costs a lot, right? I'm broke from that expense, so you could at least pay the living expenses."
However, he wasn't bearing the full cost of the wedding. There would be gift money, and his share of expenses should be less. No matter how I tried to convince him, he wouldn't listen. Moreover, he never helped with wedding preparations, even when I discussed the dress fittings. Even when I consulted about a dress meeting.
"Why do I care about a dress? It's a woman's thing, right? You just decide whatever."
That's how he responded. And there were issues with his friends too. He seemed to have many friends, as his mobile phone frequently rang. Often, calls were from women I didn't know. When I questioned him, suspecting infidelity.
"They're just friends. Jealousy is unattractive."
He dismissed it entirely. Unable to ask more, I was left in the dark until one night I overheard something shocking. It was when I woke up in the middle of the night. I usually slept with him in the bedroom, but that night, thirsty and awake, I noticed he wasn't there. I heard voices from the living room. He was on the phone. "Daniel?" I was about to open the door to the living room, but his words stopped me. Our apartment walls are thin, so conversations are usually audible. "I wished I had married Emily," he said, laughing. And Emily's voice, loud enough through the phone, responded.
"But you'll quit your job someday, right? I want someone who can really provide."
She laughed. Her voice was unbearably annoying. It was clear she was flirting with Daniel and aware of his attraction. But Daniel continued the call unfazed. "It was really great when I was dating you. You're so cute. Should we get back together?" Emily burst into laughter at his suggestion.
"That would be sad for your fiancé, wouldn't it? Though I'm definitely cuter."
She laughed. Daniel continued to badmouth me with ease. I shed a tear at his cruelty. And whispered quietly, so as not to be heard in the next room. "Daniel, you never really loved me. I thought I could finally be happy." I cried, stifling my voice so he wouldn't notice. Unaware of me, they continued their sweet conversation. Their phone call was hellish for me to overhear. Why did I rush into this marriage? I muttered, crying. He was definitely cheating, and it seemed unlikely he'd return to the kind man he was before we lived together. But the wedding was only a week away. What should I do? I could only despair about the future. Then came the wedding day. Daniel and I were preparing in the dressing room. Our families had already entered the ceremony hall, leaving us alone. Just waiting for the attendant to arrive, we heard a knock.
"Come in, please."
I invited them in, thinking it was the attendant. However, the person who entered the dressing room wasn't the attendant, but a woman in a pink dress.
Excuse me.
I froze at that familiar voice. It was the woman on the phone with Daniel that night. I instinctively knew it. As I stood there, stunned, Daniel spoke in an excited tone. "Ah, if it isn't Emily. You made it here without getting lost," he said, patting Emily's head. I was baffled by his words and actions, and she looked at him and happily responded.
Daniel gave me the room number. But is this woman your marriage partner?
She laughed, looking at me. Yeah, that's right. Oh, really?
Such a plain dress for the main character of the day.
It's quite dull. She critically eyed my dress from top to bottom, irritated by her assertive words. I replied, "This is the dressing room. The attendant will be here soon, so could you please leave now?" I said to her in a stern tone. Then she quickly hid behind Daniel.
No way, jealousy? This woman is glaring at me. It's really scary. Daniel, help me.
She feigned fear.
Addison, jealousy is unbecoming.
She's an important person to me, don't be mean. He admonished me. He couldn't see her face behind his back, but she was smirking at me. Her flashy makeup and perfectly styled hair were apparent. She was probably around the same age as me. She spoke with a triumphant look at me.
Daniel really should have married me instead. You'll get bored of such a plain woman in 3 days, won't you?
She laughed. Indeed. I wouldn't choose a woman like this unless she had a decent income. She's not my type, he said, looking down on me. I remained silent on purpose. I thought I'd let them talk as they pleased for a bit longer. I clenched the hem of my dress.
I really wanted to marry you. Even if we can't be a real couple, you will always be the wife of my heart. Daniel, even if you're married, we'll always be together, right? Such an ugly woman is just for the money.
She laughed brightly.
That's right. We'll always be together. I'll quit my job and live off Addison's money with you.
He made an outrageous proposal to her. At that moment, I was on the verge of exploding. What did these two think of me? But they were oblivious to my anger.
Daniel, you're terrible to your wife. Are you proposing that because I'm cuter?
She asked him with upturned eyes. He nodded as if it were obvious.
My Emily is the cutest in the venue, right? What do you think of Addison's face, Emily?
Daniel asked with a sarcastic smile, turning to Emily. Despite my presence, this was how they treated me. It seemed nothing but a joke to me. Then Emily, seeing me, burst out laughing.
What? Your wife is ugly.
And she continued.
Poor Daniel, marrying such an ugly woman. I'll soothe you as your heart's wife,
she said, looking down on me with a laugh.
That's right, isn't it?
Daniel laughed too. That's it, I can't take it anymore.
I'm calling off the marriage.
I said that straight to Daniel. He, not taking me seriously.
Really? If you cancel the marriage with me, you'll stay single forever. Because you're an unfixable ugly woman.
He started laughing. Emily too.
Daniel, you're too honest. I'm laughing so hard, my stomach hurts.
She clutched her stomach, laughing uproariously. After laughing, Daniel said,
A woman like you should be grateful to get married. You'll support me with your money for life.
I felt a deep rage boiling inside me. Frustrated at myself for not seeing through such a person before the wedding. I clenched my fists, trying to endure. Emily, still laughing.
Well, the wedding ceremony is about to start, right? I have to go eat my share of the celebration money, so I'll head to the venue first,
she said and left the room. Shortly after, the attendant arrived. Seemingly unaware of the conversation in the dressing room, the attendant began preparations, congratulating us. Then the attendant started explaining the wedding. Daniel and I had chosen a restaurant wedding, starting with the reception. According to the attendant, we just had to follow the MC's lead. I listened quietly to the attendant's explanation. Daniel spoke to me nonchalantly.
Once the wedding is over and we're officially married, we'll be husband and wife. Your looks are a letdown, but I'll put up with it. After all, I have Emily.
I ignored his comment. I had no intention of listening to him anymore. I was done with this man. Daniel persisted.
Hey! Answer me.
But I continued to ignore him. All that was left was to exact revenge and denounce him and his actions. I felt a sense of mission burning within me. Then Daniel and I entered the wedding venue. The unsuspecting attendees gave us a generous round of applause. Of course, among them was Emily, smirking unpleasantly. We sat down, and the MC proceeded with the ceremony.
Let's start with the vows. First, the groom, Daniel.
Amidst thunderous applause, Daniel began speaking. I am overjoyed to marry Addison.
I vow to love only her for the rest of my life.
He looked at me with a smug face. All lies. Inside, I looked at him with a cold detachment. Amidst the applause, the MC continued.
Thank you. Now, a response from the bride, Addison, please.
I ignored the MC and remained silent. A murmur started spreading through the venue. My parents and friends looked worried.
Addison? Could we have your response, please?
The MC tried to proceed, albeit confused. Still, I remained silent. The venue became more unsettled. Everyone looked at me with concern. Impatient.
Addison, why are you silent? Just say something.
Daniel harshly said. But I kept quiet. The atmosphere in the venue turned decidedly strange. The in-laws looked at me with puzzled expressions. Enough was enough. I had gathered enough attention. I thought so and opened my mouth. Glancing sideways, I saw Daniel relieved that I was finally going to speak. I confirmed his face and momentarily smirked. It was too early for him to feel relieved. Then I began speaking.
I will not vow to love Daniel. I'm breaking up with him right now. What?
Daniel was stunned, and I casually played the voice recorder at maximum volume. Daniel and Emily's conversation filled the room.
I really wanted to marry Emily. Even if we can't be a real couple, Emily is the wife of my heart. Daniel, we'll always be together even if you're married, right? Such an ugly woman is just for the money.
The conversation from the dressing room earlier echoed through the venue. Previously, when Daniel was on the phone with Emily at night, I felt frustrated for not having proof of infidelity. So, I bought a voice recorder. I always carried it with me, and fortunately, I managed to record their conversation today. The crowd became even more agitated. My friends looked at Daniel with suspicion. My dad seemed ready to get up and punch Daniel, held back only by my mom. My mother-in-law looked like she might faint, and father-in-law John hurriedly supported her. Emily, sitting at a table with friends, was being glared at by those around her. She was sweating profusely and looked extremely uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the recording continued to play. In this chaotic situation, Daniel, confused, shouted,
Addison, what are you doing? Stop that voice recorder right now.
He tried to grab the recorder from me, but I swiftly dodged him. Then I shouted loudly,
There's no way I'll stop it. Everyone needs to know that Daniel is cheating with Emily over there.
I glared at Daniel. Unable to hold back anymore, Emily shouted from her table,
You're so sneaky. Just because you get to be Daniel's wife. The one Daniel truly cares about is cute me.
However, Emily's outburst caused the venue to buzz with a different energy, whispering among themselves. Everyone, regardless of age or gender. Seeing this, Emily began to panic.
What's going on, everyone? What's the matter?
I calmly told her.
Emily, sorry to interrupt your confident speech, but I think you're the ugliest person in this venue.
Someone laughed out loud. Immediately, her face turned bright red.
What? What are you talking about? Daniel told me I'm the cutest, you know? Maybe you're the one with bad eyesight?
She retorted sharply at me. Laughter began to leak from the audience. Emily and Daniel started to look confused. Then one of Daniel's friends burst out laughing and shouted,
Daniel, you've got terrible taste in women. Liking a girl with a face like a panda. And her body's like a panda too.
Following this comment from Daniel's friend, the whole venue erupted into laughter.
What? Aren't you being rude?
Emily yelled at Daniel's friend, but her voice was drowned out by the laughter. Yes, she did look like a panda. First, her makeup heavily lined around the eyes. With her small eyes, she really resembled a panda. And her body was full-figured, making her pink dress seem tight. Her upper arms jiggled violently with every movement. I was worried her pink dress might rip at any moment. The moment I saw her in the dressing room, I realized Daniel's taste was too peculiar. It made sense why he would call me ugly. I borrowed a microphone from the MC.
She called me ugly in the dressing room, but I wasn't upset at all. After all, she is a panda. It's amusing to be insulted by a zoo animal, isn't it? As I spoke clearly, laughter erupted from various parts of the venue. Her face turned beet red with frustration.
So frustrating! She stamped her feet in anger. Daniel glared at me. I sighed heavily at the two of them.
People who cheat have no right to glare at me.
Daniel and Emily remained silent, hit by the truth. Then I addressed the silent couple.
I'll be sure to collect the engagement breakup fee from both of you.
They immediately became defensive upon hearing about the fee.
Why should we pay a breakup fee when we aren't even registered as married? I absolutely won't pay. I won't either. I'm a freelancer, I don't have that kind of money.
Emily exclaimed. The crowd looked on in disbelief at their comments. Some even chuckled at their ridiculousness. Then a person stood up and approached us.
Daniel, enough is enough.
Daniel's boss, with a red face, yelled.
Boss! This is,
Daniel, looking perplexed, tried to make an excuse to his boss. But he seemed at a loss for words and remained confused. The boss sighed heavily at his demeanor.
What an irreparable thing you've done. Cheating openly in front of Addison, maybe it's my fault for not educating you properly.
The boss said, holding his head. His face turning pale. He seemed to be trembling slightly. Emily, looking puzzled, said,
That ugly woman is from a different company than Daniel, right? Why is Daniel's boss so worried about it?
She asked, tilting her head. Sensing something off from the boss's reaction, Daniel asked, Boss, what's wrong? My engagement breakup with Addison has nothing to do with you, right? He asked nonchalantly. Then the boss, face red with anger, shouted,
Don't you know our company's board of directors? Don't you recognize Addison's dad?
He yelled desperately. Daniel looked back and forth between the boss and my dad.
No way!
He muttered. His face turned pale. My dad's face was red with rage, veins popping.
I am a director at your company. Your future will be discussed at the board meeting.
Daniel was shocked. He tried to appease my dad in a panic.
Wait, please. It's too much for this incident to lead to that.
Daniel's friends were also surprised. They were all his colleagues, so bewildered by this turn of events. It's natural to be confused when the bride's dad is a director at your own company. Then my dad said calmly,
Weren't you planning to quit the company and live off my daughter? You just played it on the voice recorder. If you're so eager to leave the company, why don't you do it now?
That's... Daniel's face was filled with despair. And with Dad's words, Daniel's mother finally fainted. His father, John, was frantically calling her name. For her, Daniel was probably the pride and joy of the family. A well-educated graduate working in a major corporation. He must have been on a seemingly perfect elite path. But now, this incident not only derailed his elite trajectory but also cast his future into uncertainty. I had only met the in-laws once at a greeting. But they seemed like very nice and sensible people. That's why this incident must have been incredibly hard for her to accept. Daniel looked terribly bewildered by his mother fainting. And then, incredibly, Daniel yelled at me.
If you had told me your dad was a director at our company, I would have treated you better.
He accused me, completely disregarding his own actions. He seems to be pretending that nothing happened to him. That was the last straw for me. Daniel blaming me in such a situation. I didn't care what happened to him anymore. I asked Daniel with a smile.
Treat me better? Like contributing to our living expenses during cohabitation? Or not contributing money but at least staying out of housework? That's...
He faltered. I exposed to everyone that Daniel didn't contribute to living expenses and yet interfered in household matters. Daniel was now subjected to even more disdainful looks from the crowd. Especially the women there didn't seem to see him as a human anymore. Maybe they thought even a weed would be better than him. Even Emily said to him,
Daniel, you didn't pay any living expenses at all? That's really bad, isn't it?
He, realizing the gravity of the situation, turned even paler. I smiled at him. Good for you, Daniel.
You wanted to quit your job, right? You'll probably be able to quit very soon.
He looked around. Dad, glaring at him in rage. Friends looking at him with disdain. Emily, a bit in disbelief. Not a single person was on his side. In such a situation, most people couldn't stand it. Then he began to tremble and clung to me.
Addison, I was wrong. Please don't call off the engagement. I don't want to quit my job.
He apologized profusely. Sweat on his forehead. It was too late for apologies. I looked at him with cold eyes. It's over, Daniel.
After being looked down upon like this, there's no going back. Just stop it. But...
He looked like he was about to cry. I added the final blow.
Freelancer Emily and soon-to-be unemployed Daniel, a perfect match.
Emily turned pale as well. If she were burdened with an unemployed Daniel, they would both be in trouble. Quickly, Emily distanced herself from Daniel. And then, Daniel collapsed, his knees giving way.
Don't ever show up in front of me again.
I left the two of them behind and exited the venue in my wedding dress. Eventually, he left the company. The company's decision was a demotion in the guise of a department transfer. A department where his main job was sorting documents. However, many company associates had witnessed his debacle at the wedding. Leading them was our dad, a director of the company. The smart ones started keeping their distance from Daniel, and it seems he was secretly condemned by many. Consequently, he found it increasingly difficult to stay at the company. Eventually, unable to bear it, he submitted his resignation before the transfer. But leaving the company brought him further trials. It was the hefty breakup fee. The engagement breakup fee was just the going rate, not too high. But we added the wedding costs on top of it. Since the wedding turned out that way, we had to return the congratulatory money to all the guests. But the food was served, and the full cost of the wedding had to be paid. He was responsible for the disruption of the wedding, so it was decided that he would bear the cost. Daniel's parents, who were very nice people, apologized to me several times. I felt almost sorry for them. Daniel had no savings. He was flashy with money and spent whatever he had. Therefore, his parents initially shouldered the guarantee money. However, in the discussion,
if I marry Addison, I don't have to pay, right? Then I'll register the marriage.
Daniel argued. I felt nothing but contempt for him. And for saying that, he was severely scolded by his father, John. Eventually, an infuriated John said, "You're hopeless. I'm done with you." Daniel was visibly panicked. With no job and no home, Daniel was in a dire situation. Naturally, The apartment where Daniel and I had been living was already in the process of being vacated. I think he has to leave by the end of this month. I had already arranged movers and sent my belongings to my parents' house, leaving the apartment. After that, he kept ignoring the landlord's eviction notices. Eventually, he was sued. I found out about this because the landlord contacted me. Apparently, he had stayed there for about 3 months without paying rent. He was forcibly evicted through legal proceedings. It's unlikely that he who now disowned by his parents could return to his parents' home. Jobless and homeless, his future looked bleak. I think he has hit rock bottom. And he hasn't rebuilt anything with Emily. Through a lawyer, I demanded the guarantee money from her. I offered a condition: if she didn't reconcile with Daniel, the fee would be reduced. Without hesitation, she chose not to reconcile. I'm not interested in someone without money or a home, she declared firmly. Apparently, Daniel reached out to her several times for help, but she ignored all his attempts. She apologized to me. I'm really sorry. Since that wedding, everyone calls me a panda. It's been tough. I think the guests spread the word. She seemed to have realized her mistakes and reflected on her actions. But no matter her remorse, she faced constant criticism. Even at her part-time job, the panda nickname got out and she quit, being laughed at behind her back. I'm thinking of moving far away, she said. She, forced to flee due to her careless comments with Daniel. She will likely continue to be cautious about public scrutiny. A fitting punishment for her disdainful behavior. I hope she learns from this. As for me, I passed my certification exam. The qualification is for a social insurance labor consultant. Working in general affairs, dealing with payroll and entry/exit procedures, I wanted to be more knowledgeable about labor management. This will surely motivate me more in my work. Not just in work, but I've also taken a step forward in romance. After the wedding, my friends started introducing me to men, knowing I was done with parties. I was grateful for their kindness. There's one man, introduced by a friend, with whom I've become close. He's 3 years older, hardworking, and not very handsome. Rather plain-looking. He works office administration in a small to medium enterprise, nothing glamorous. After Daniel, elite and good-looking men trigger a rejection in me. So, this man feels like someone I can be myself with. It's still early to tell how it will go. But it's a step forward. I want to cherish this one step forward for the future.